Focusing your image correctly is very important. Many images in a photo shoot end up being ruined due to poor focus of the subject. When using an autofocus camera, the image will focus for you automatically and usually shows two indications that the subject is in focus. An indicator in the focus screen will turn green. A small solid circle will appear, usually in the bottom left corner of the viewfinder display. When both of these indicators are visible, the subject should be in focus. When using a manual focus camera, the image will gradually focus as you turn the large focusing ring on the front of the lens. You will need to move the focusing ring back and forth in small increments to refine the focus to the sharpest value. The most common complaints that I hear from most photographers of any experience level is, "My images aren't sharp," and "I can't get my focus to lock." Most want to blame their equipment, and while there are many instances that equipment is to blame, I've found that a vast majority are just simple user error. This is often down to a lack of understanding of how an autofocus system works. Let's take a look at a few items that will give you a better understanding of focus and sharpness, and hopefully help you take photographs that you're very happy with. My what? Your diopter, or your eyepiece. You'll never know if your subject is in good focus if you can't see what is sharp yourself through the eyepiece. On the side of your eyepiece is a small wheel to adjust the focus of your eyepiece in accordance to your vision. You can adjust the eyepiece to a fairly large degree, but if you need more eyesight correction, there are replacement diopters available for DSLRs from many of the major manufacturers in a range from -5 to +4 as needed. No, this won't help your autofocus work any better, but it will help you appreciate when it's failing and assist with manual focusing. What are all those things in there anyway? Well, here is where you may have to take your manual out. Remember that book of paper that came with your camera? Most common DSLRs have 9 to 11 focus points. Top-of-the-line professional cameras can have 45 to 51 focus points, although really only 11 to 19 are selectable. The rest are assist points. There are two types of focus points, single plane and cross point. Single plane only work on lines of contrast that are perpendicular or at a 90-degree angle to their orientation. So, if you look through your viewfinder, most of the focus points are rectangles. Some are oriented horizontal, some vertical. Single plane focus points will work only perpendicular to their orientation. So, say you were shooting a tree. A vertical orientation focus point would not be able to find the edge of the tree, but a horizontal one would. You can use this to your advantage by choosing a focus point that would lock to the line you want and ignore lines you don't need the focus to seek. Cross-point focus points will work with lines of contrast that align either way. Most cameras consist of a single cross point in the center, surrounded by single planes around them. Newer high-end cameras now are featuring cross points at all focus points. Each focus point also has a particular sensitivity. Most need a lens of at least f5.6 maximum aperture to even use autofocus. On most cameras, the surrounding autofocus points are of this sensitivity, and the center point offers increased sensitivity if you use a lens with a maximum aperture of at least f2.8. So, if you're working in a low light situation, you may obtain a better autofocus using the center focus point. If you're not using a lens of f2.8 or better, there is no low light advantage to the center focus point, but it still may be more accurate since it is a cross point. Also, when looking at the focus point rectangles, the actual sensor area is 2 to 3 times larger than what is shown. Bear this in mind when focusing. If you're focusing on the bridge of someone's nose as your point of focus, remember that the person's eye is also within that actual sensor area. The autofocus will lock onto the eye rather than the bridge of the nose because it has more edge contrast than the flat light of the nose. Often it may not matter, but if you're working with a very shallow depth of field, it can make a difference to which area of the image has the sharpest focus. Most autofocus systems have a certain amount of error or slop that may actually overshoot the point of best focus because of the mechanics and inertia of the lens movement. You can help minimize that by manually focusing the lens close to focus and then let the autofocus system take up the rest of the movement. Or if that sounds like too much effort, at least give the autofocus 2 attempts to get it right. Perform 1 half press of the shutter to bring it close, and then do another to fine-tune it. An advantage that higher-end lenses have is full manual operation even when autofocus is locked. Cheaper lenses will not allow you to touch up focus manually once lock is obtained, though this is a good way to ensure focus is as perfect as it can be. Autofocus systems work on lines of contrast, so can struggle on subjects without this feature. For example, a cheek or a forehead, a completely white dress or a black tuxedo. On areas like this, the autofocus will hunt all day and may never actually lock. The approach is to find a better line. So eyes, lines between the contrasting shirt and suit, the line between land and sky or a doorway. Anything that has contrast will help the autofocus work better and faster. Unless you are in an extremely fast situation that just requires incredibly fast focusing, it's best to avoid using the all-point focus. This mode doesn't know what you want to focus on and usually focuses on whatever is closest to the camera. There are some situations where this is perfect, but they are few and far between. While using a deeper depth of field with a smaller aperture can improve apparent sharpness of the image, remember one thing. No matter what the depth of field, there is only one point of focus. So always practice good focusing techniques regardless of the aperture you may be using. When we stand taking a photo, we all have a tendency to sway forward and backwards, especially bent over a subject with a heavy camera lens combo. It's natural. Everyone does it to some degree. And if you're shooting with a very narrow depth of field, that small distance you sway can influence how sharp and in focus the area you want is. If you have a depth of field of 4 inches, swaying 2 inches can make all the difference in the world. So use a tripod. Now, I have to admit, as much as I use a tripod, I really dislike them. They interfere with how I work and most of the time with the way I shoot. So, if you'd prefer to avoid using one, at least take the time to use a good photographer's stance. 1 foot in front of the other with a slight crouch. Arms locked to your sides, not up in the air. And body weight centered over your legs. For portrait or headshots, it's fairly widely agreed upon. The eyes. For other portraits, it is still the face, unless there's another body part that you want the focus of the image to be on. Have your sharpest focus on the area that you want to draw the viewer's eye to. In landscapes, it's not always as easy, but you still follow the same rules as previously stated. Don't settle for, it's a wide-angle landscape, focus on infinity. If you have a foreground subject, focus on that and let your depth of field carry the image to the background. If the foreground subject does not have sharp focus, it adds confusion to the image since we naturally see things up close sharper than far away objects. Shutter speed is another issue that can lead to a lack of sharpness. Every person has a limit to how slow a shutter speed they can handhold at any given focal length lens. Some people are steadier than others, but if you don't have sufficient shutter speed to overcome the movement or shake of your hands, your image will come out blurry. For standard and wide-angle lenses, most people can hand-hold down to about 1/30th to 1/60th of a second. For longer telephoto lenses, it usually requires much more. A general rule that people start with is 1 over the focal length of their lens. So for example, if you have a 200mm lens, shoot at 1/200th of a second and go from there to determine your holding ability. If your subject is moving, holding the camera still or a tripod won't help. You'll need to have sufficient shutter speed to stop the action. Most start at around 1/250th, but it depends on how fast your subject is moving. Requirements also vary depending on whether you're shooting static or panning along with the subject. If you pan, you can get away with a far slower shutter speed and also get some interesting effects going on too. It lets you show movement in the background but stops the subject. Having the correct exposure and having great light is essential to good focus and sharpness. Since sharpness is determined by a line of contrast, if you are underexposed or have dull lighting, an image will not appear sharp even if all your other focus criteria are met. There's a small chance that it may actually be a problem with your equipment. Since third-party lenses have to be reverse engineered, they won't always work perfectly with brand name cameras. Some do great, but others don't. But sometimes even the brand lenses are not perfectly produced. There is a simple test that you can do at home to help give you a good idea if it is you or the camera. Find a ruler or a yardstick and place it on a table going away from the camera. Mount your camera on a tripod and open the aperture up all the way. Shoot down on the ruler at a 45-degree angle, focusing on a certain mark. If that mark is what you see clearest when you open the picture, then your equipment is fine. Go back and work on your technique. If the sharpest point is in front of or behind that point, then you know there is an equipment problem and it should be sent in for service. Now we've covered a huge amount of information here in this particular lecture, so congratulations for making it this far. I do feel that good focus and sharpness are two of the most important technical things that you need to get right in an image. It can make the difference between what looks professional and what looks like the work of an amateur. And of course, we all want to look professional, don't we?